Alright, I thought we should have a look at the investigation into Matt Gaetz and also how creepy the dude is, because it all seems relevant. And here's where it all kicked off. An article by the New York Times. Matt Gaetz is said to face Justice Department inquiry over sex with underage girl. An inquiry into the Florida congressman was opened in the final months of the Trump administration, people briefed on it said. Alright, and now let's start this with that interview he did with Tucker Carlson, because that shit was insane.
Late this afternoon, the New York Times ran a story saying that Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is under federal investigation for playing some role in sex trafficking and potentially having a relationship with a 17-year-old girl. There are very few details in major news outlets tonight about this story. We have no background on it all and not even any very informed questions. Instead, we've invited Congressman Gaetz on the show to respond to these stories and give us his view of them. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. So this is obviously a serious allegation. Tell us what the truth is from your perspective.
It is a horrible allegation, and it is a lie. The New York Times is running a story that I have traveled with a 17-year-old woman, and that is verifiably false. People can look at my travel records and see that that is not the case.
People aren't really concerned about the traveling you're doing, bro. People are concerned about the underage people you're fucking. That's the problem. Notice that he says, check my travel records. What's that got to do with anything? They're investigating whether you've paid for underage girls to travel to participate in sex act. Carrying on. This is when it gets very interesting.
What is happening is an extortion of me and my family involving a former Department of Justice official. On March 16th, my father got a text message demanding a meeting wherein a person demanded $25 million in exchange for making horrible sex trafficking allegations against me go away. Our family was so troubled by that, we went to the local FBI. And the FBI and the Department of Justice were so concerned about this attempted extortion of a member of Congress that they asked my dad to wear a wire, which he did with the former Department of Justice official. Tonight, I am demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI release the audio recordings that were made under their supervision and at their direction, which will prove my innocence and that will show that these allegations aren't true. They're merely intended to try to bleed my family out of money. And this former Department of Justice official tomorrow was supposed to be contacted by my father so that specific instructions could be given regarding the wiring of $4.5 million as a down payment on this bribe. I don't think it's a coincidence that tonight, somehow, the New York Times is leaking this information, smearing me, and ruining the investigation that would likely result in one of the former colleagues of the current DOJ being brought to justice for trying to extort me and my family.
And there he just told us that someone is allegedly trying to extort him over this investigation, and that he's kind of confirmed that the investigation is really happening, because really no one could try to extort you if you weren't being investigated. If there was no investigation and someone tried to get a bribe out of you, you'd just say, there's nothing happening. I can't give you money to make nothing go away. So he's just confirmed it, and now let's hear what else he has to say about this attempted extortion.
So a couple of obvious questions that come to mind, and again, just to restate, this just happened, don't have any other information beyond what we've already said and you have said. First of all, who is this Department of Justice former employee who's trying to extort the money from you, you say?
His name is David McGee. He was a top official in the leadership in the Northern District of Florida as a prosecutor. He currently works at the Beggs and Lane law firm. As a matter of fact, one of the recordings that was made at the FBI and Department of Justice request occurred at that law firm, and the money that was supposed to be paid today that would have shown even more evidence of David McGee's work in this extortion scheme, that was foiled by the New York Times story, and I believe that's why this horrible information and these terrible allegations have been used this evening.
So back during the Trump administration, they start looking into this guy, and then the story breaks recently, and so he comes on a TV show to say, oh yeah, David McGee was trying to extort me because of this. What a fucking clown. Like, did he actually think that saying that David McGee, and then giving all these details about this alleged person, was trying to extort him, and he went to the FBI and his dad wore a wire and everything, would then make the investigation look any less credible? Come on, Florida, you're not sending your finest.
So you're, and I'll get to the investigation in a sec, but you're saying that David McGee was motivated by greed. He was trying to extort money from your family. That's his motivation, you're saying?
I know that there was a demand for money in exchange for a commitment that he could make this investigation go away along with his co-conspirators. They even claimed to have specific connections inside the Biden White House. Now, I don't know if that's true. They were promising that Joe Biden would pardon me. Obviously, I don't need a pardon. I'm not seeking a pardon. I have not done anything improper or wrong. But what I am troubled by is the real motivation for all of this. You know, just tonight, Ted Lieu, a Democrat, is calling on me to be removed from the House Judiciary Committee.
I don't see how he can bring motivation of anything into this, considering the investigation started during the Trump administration and what some Democrat calls for him to step down from some committee. Yeah, that's probably because of the investigation being public now and the things you've been accused of, mate. Jeez. Oh, and here's probably my favorite part of the whole interview.
And I believe we are in an era of our politics now, Tucker, where people are smeared to try to take them out of the conversation. I'm not the only person on screen right now who's been falsely accused of a terrible sex act. You were accused of something that you did not do, and so you know what this feels like. You know the pain it can bring to your family, and you know how it just puts people on defense when you're accused of something so salacious and awful. But it did not happen. It is not true. And the fact that it is the basis of this attempt to extort my family tells a lot. And if the FBI and Department of Justice will release the tapes that they are in possession of, the American people will see what is really going on.
And there's the moment that Tucker Carlson regrets letting him on his show. And how Matt Gaetz calls for the tapes to be released and then people will see the truth or whatever. It's like what people will see, that David McGee really did try to extort you. You see, the thing with someone trying to extort you over this just makes it look all that more credible and serious. Because if they were working for the Justice Department and saw that someone with a lot of money was going to be in a lot of shit, so they try to extort you, if you look really innocent, I don't think they'll try to extort you, mate. That's the thing. If this really did happen, it's not helping your case.
You just referred to a mentally ill viewer who accused me of a sex crime 20 years ago. And of course, it was not true. I'd never met the person. But I do agree with you that being accused falsely is one of the worst things that can happen, and you do see it a lot. Let's go back to the investigation. You say that it was or is underway. There was an investigation. What is the basis of that investigation? What is the allegation? That's really not very clear from these news stories.
Yeah, again, I only know what I've read in the New York Times. I can say that actually you and I went to dinner about 2 years ago. Your wife was there, and I brought a friend of mine. You'll remember her. And she was actually threatened by the FBI, told that if she wouldn't cop to the fact that somehow I was involved in some pay-for-play scheme, that she could face trouble. And so I do believe that there are people at the Department of Justice who are trying to smear me, providing for flights and hotel rooms for people that you're dating who are of legal age is not a crime. And I'm just troubled that the lack of any sort of legitimate investigation into me would then convert into this extortion attempt.
There's a lot in there, so even Tucker was trying to clarify what's going on with the whole back to the investigation, what's actually going on there. And Matt Gaetz actually says, I don't know. I only know what's been said in the media, in the New York Times article, which came out this year. And then straight away turns to talking about something that happened 2 years ago, where he brings up Tucker again about some dinner that happened 2 years ago with Tucker and his wife and some woman who's been, as Matt Gaetz says, harassed by the FBI. So in this one interview, it's gone from the FBI, the people he's turned to when he's being extorted, to 2 years ago, the FBI were harassing a woman that I took to dinner with you, remember? Wow.
I don't remember the woman you're speaking of or the context at all, honestly. But I would like to know who. So they're saying there is a 17-year-old girl who you had a relationship with. Is that true? And who are they? Who is this girl? What are they talking about, the New York Times?
The person doesn't exist. I have not had a relationship with a 17-year-old. That is totally false. The allegation, as I read it in the New York Times, is that I've traveled with some 17-year-old in some relationship. That is false, and records will bear that out to be false.
How long has this investigation been going on? Do you know?
I don't know.
When were you first informed of it?
Again, I really saw this as a deeply troubling challenge for my family on March 16th, when people were, talking about a minor and that there were pictures of me with child prostitutes. That's obviously false. There will be no such pictures because no such thing happened. But really on March 16th was when this got going from the extortion standpoint.
So what happens next? I mean, you can see there is this investigation, I guess a criminal investigation. I'm not quite sure where the sex trafficking part comes in. I don't, again, for the fifth time, I don't really understand this story very well. But where does it go from here? I mean, you've made an allegation against someone by name on the air and accused him of trying to extort millions of dollars from your family. What happens tomorrow?
Well, what was supposed to happen was the transfer of this money that would have implicated the former colleague of these current DOJ officials. But that's obviously not going to happen tomorrow because the New York Times story was leaked in order to quell that investigative effort. So here's what needs to happen next. The FBI and the Department of Justice must release the tapes that are in their possession that were done at their direction. Those tapes will show that I am innocent and that the whole concept of sex charges against me was really just a way to try to bleed my family out of money and probably smear my name because I am a well-known, outspoken conservative, and I guess that's out of style in a lot of parts of the country right now.
Matt Gaetz, I appreciate your coming on tonight.
Thanks for giving me the chance to tell the truth, Tucker. I appreciate it.
It's a more interesting and complicated story than I knew from reading about it. Thank you very much.
So the dude says, check my travel records, I haven't traveled with any underage girls. And he also says, it's not a crime to pay for your partner to travel, when he's been accused of paying for underage girls' travel. Interesting. And it's a fucked up time when you gotta somewhat agree with Tucker Carlson. And yeah, bro, what happened to David McGee? This interview is more than a week old by now. Just gonna give out those details on air, which, if it was a real case, seems like that will be problematic. And I will just say, because I've been dying to say it this whole time, David McGee sounds like the most made up name I've ever heard. Alright, we have one last bit of this clip from Fox News, and then we'll see what else has been in the news in regards to this whole Matt Gaetz investigation.
Matt Gaetz interview, that was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. That story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago, and on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much. But it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it. Don't quite understand it, but we'll bring you more when we find out.
Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida could be in deeper and more serious legal trouble than previously reported, and now his communications director has resigned. A source tells NBC News the senior staffer quit out of principle. This bizarre drama began to unfold earlier this week when the New York Times first reported Congressman Gaetz is under federal investigation for possible sex trafficking and an alleged sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl. The lawmakers has family denied the allegations against him. Here's NBC's Hallie Jackson.
This morning, new allegations about Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, a report of a Justice Department investigation focusing on Gaetz and an indicted Florida politician, and allegations of their involvement with multiple women who were recruited online for sex and received cash payments, according to the New York Times, citing sources close to the investigation. The Times reporting investigators are focusing on Gaetz and Joel Greenberg, a former tax collector in Seminole County, Florida, indicted last year and now pleading not guilty to a federal sex trafficking charge and other crimes. The Times writing Greenberg initially met the women through websites that connect people who go on dates in exchange for gifts, fine dining, travel, and allowances. Mr. Greenberg introduced the women to Mr. Gaetz, who also had sex with them. According to people close to the investigation who spoke with the Times, some of the men and women took ecstasy, an illegal mood-altering drug, before having sex, including Mr. Gaetz. The Times reports it reviewed scripts from Cash App, a mobile payments app, and Apple Pay that reportedly show payments from Gaetz and Greenberg to one of the women and a payment from Greenberg to a second woman, according to the Times report. NBC News has not reviewed those documents. Gaetz denied ever paying a woman for sex. And a spokesman says Matt Gaetz refutes all the disgusting allegations completely. The Florida Republican already in the spotlight. After revelations earlier this week, the Justice Department is examining whether Gaetz violated federal sex trafficking laws by having a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid for her to travel with him.
The person doesn't exist. That is totally false.
The 38-year-old conservative congressman, elected in 2016, has been a staunch ally of former President Donald Trump.
Another day, another crazy report about Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Tonight, NBC News, citing a law enforcement official, reports that federal investigators are looking into his travel into the Bahamas with women, and specifically whether those women were paid to travel for sex, which could violate federal law. According to CBS News, Gaetz allegedly traveled with, and I'm quoting here, a marijuana entrepreneur and hand surgeon named Jason Pirazzolo, who allegedly paid for the travel expenses, accommodations, and female escorts. Pirazzolo did not respond to requests for comment. CBS News also reporting that investigators want to know if Gaetz was accepting paid escorts in exchange for political access or legislative favors. Gaetz denies that he engaged in sex trafficking, including with a 17-year-old girl who is reported to be part of the investigation. A spokesperson told CBS News Representative Gaetz has never paid for sex, nor has he had sex with an underage girl. What began with blaring headlines about sex trafficking has now turned into a general fishing exercise about vacations and consensual relationships with adults. Important to remember as these stories keep breaking, Matt Gaetz is not some plucky young guy who made a name for himself on his own. He's the son of the former president of the Florida Senate, whose connections and deep pockets helped his son become a state senator and a member of Congress. In 2008, Gaetz was charged with DUI after getting pulled over for speeding in his daddy's BMW. He refused a breathalyzer test, and the charges were ultimately dropped. This is someone who's always coasted on his privilege, so it's no surprise he glommed onto another child of privilege whose dad opened doors for him, Donald Trump. When Gaetz's associates started being questioned by investigators last year, the New York Times reports Gaetz sought a blanket pardon from Trump, who had been loyal to for years. Not clear how much Gaetz knew about the investigation at the time. Gaetz didn't get the pardon, but after a long delay, Trump did come out today with a brief, carefully worded statement claiming the congressman had never directly asked him for a pardon, adding that Gaetz has totally denied the accusations against him.
All right, well, that should bring us pretty up to date with the investigation into him. Now, here's just some more extra bits of information to add to how concerning and creepy this dude is.
Sources tell us that when he was a member of the Florida State House of Representatives, Gaetz had quite a reputation for his sexual conquest, that he participated in what's been described as some sort of game with other male colleagues that awarded points for various targets like interns, and that his female colleagues often referred to him as, quote, creepy Gaetz, because he made them feel just so uncomfortable.
A former Florida lawmaker revealed that Matt Gaetz, who's currently facing a DOJ investigation for possible sex trafficking of a minor, also fought to protect revenge porn or anti-revenge porn legislation in the state of Florida. So this former Florida state representative, Tom Goodson, a Republican, described how embattled Representative Matt Gaetz was the primary opponent of his bill outlawing revenge porn, aka pornographic images of the victim distributed by a former sex partner without consent, when the now US congressman served in the home states, or in his home state's House of Representatives. So he's a state lawmaker at the time. There's this proposal to ban revenge porn, and Matt Gaetz apparently stands in the way. Goodson says Matt was absolutely against it. He thought the picture was his to do with what he wanted. He thought that any picture was his to use as he wanted, as an expression of his rights.
Florida Representative Matt Gaetz was literally the only person to vote against an anti-human trafficking bill. That's a little interesting. You have a bill with unanimous support for human trafficking, because who wouldn't support a crackdown on human trafficking? And he's the one member of Congress who doesn't support it. That's interesting. Also,
There was one little girl I met at lunch that made an impact on me.
So you have what he's being investigated for, his behavior as a congressman, and the policies that he seemed to be for and against, and also the amount of time this guy liked to spend around schools. Like, I get it, you're a politician, you'll do these things, but this fucking often? I seriously hope somebody has checked on his adopted son. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.